Hello, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Tarek Odali from Business Review, and I will be kicking things off here today. It is our pleasure to have Veeva Systems with us who will be presenting this webinar. It's titled, Transform Your Digital Content to Improve Speed to Market While Maintaining Compliance. Today's guest speakers are Sean Hukin, Roche Diagnostics Lead Consultant, Digital Marketing, IT, and Terry Howard, Veeva Director, Global Commercial Content Strategy, Medical Device and Diagnostics. You'll hear from both of them very soon, but first I'd like to welcome you to our platform today. This is On24. It's a fully browser-based webinar platform. If you do find yourself disconnecting for any reason, please click on the link that you received via email to immediately rejoin the session today. In order to ask questions, you can send them in via the questions widget at any time. So you should see a box at the top left-hand corner of your screen. Once you've typed your question into that, please hit submit. We plan to allocate some time at the end of the session to address any questions or thoughts you may have. If you click on the survey widget at the bottom of your screen, there's some questions in there for you to answer in order to provide us with feedback. And you can do this at any time during or after the webinar ends as well. Please use the yellow help widget if you require any technical assistance. And you can move, resize, and maximize any of the windows in front of you to get a better view of the slides if you need it. But now, housekeeping out of the way, so please allow me to welcome our first speaker today. Terry, over to you.
Thank you so much, Tarek, and welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. We're really pleased to be here with you over the next hour. Sean and I have a few goals for today's webinar. First, we want to provide you with an update of some of the problems facing the life science industry in effectively managing digital content, and hopefully have you start thinking about where your organization fits in the maturity of its business processes and technology to meet those modern day demands of content management. And just a hint, you may be surprised at where you are compared to the industry. We'd also like you to leave today's session with some actionable items that you can bring into discussions with your company stakeholders. We'll begin today's session with a discussion of the state of the industry as it pertains to digital content management. We'll look at 3 key trends that life science companies consider and the key drivers that are at the heart of strategic initiatives to maximize data and content management processes. We'll then discuss the development of a mature digital content supply chain and some of the resulting benefits. I'll turn over the presentation a bit later to my co-presenter, Sean Hukin, to talk about his journey with Roche Diagnostics as they've embarked on a global digital transformation initiative. And as Tarek mentioned, we'll leave about 15 minutes at the end of the session for Q&A, so please feel free to submit your questions as we move along. I'm going to start with a poll for the audience. The question is, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the least and 5 being the most, how mature do you think your organization is at managing digital content? And as you're thinking through your answer, you might think of things like, what are your current business processes that you have in place for creating, approving, and disseminating marketing material? Or what are the roles and responsibilities of the people who are responsible for creating that content? Does your organization have tight controls over the content? Or do you think there are some gaps? Once you're done inputting your selection, make sure that you hit that submit button. And we'll give it just a couple of more seconds to make sure that everybody has a chance to respond. I'm looking forward to seeing what the answers are. I have an idea of what I think the results may be, but we'll see if I'm close to being right on that. And just a few more seconds. Great. Thanks so much. Let's see what those results are. All right, so about half of you are right in the middle and say that you've got a defined process, but maybe some room for improvement. And then another half of you are a little bit further on the maturity scale. So that's really good to hear. I guess that the majority of you are probably going to be right there in the middle somewhere. So let's talk about the state of the industry. We do continue to see three trends that are the subject of almost all digital initiative discussions in life science companies. Marketing teams are faced with increased demands for generating content from multiple channels. Digital content is distributed through websites, social media. It's created for use in the field by sales teams or at conferences by medical MSLs. And that's just to name a few of the channels that are that marketing teams are dealing with. And the complexity of digital content continues to grow as well. This creates additional costs for creative teams, whether internal or external. And a great example of this is the prolific use of surgical training videos in use at many device companies. Accenture Interactive surveyed 55 pharma and biotech companies and 53 med tech companies across the globe and published a report that reflected insights for how the industry is managing digital content. They found that over 75% of pharma companies and 95% of medtech companies that responded see a moderate to enormous increase in volume of content being produced. And almost all the respondents said volume is higher than 2 years ago. And a majority of the respondents expect the volume to increase. So what does this mean? It really means that more time and resources are spent in the operational management and production of that content rather than the actual marketing use of that content. A surprisingly low percentage of the respondents, 4% in pharma and 11% in medtech, report that they actually have a content strategy that will meet their needs. So when we think of the regulatory landscape, we know that the subject can easily fill several webinars to properly address it in full. But we know that we operate in a regulated space that is often in a state of change. The European Commission ratified new medical device regulations, the MDR, for all European member states when it pertains to medical device. And in the US, the FDA released more than a dozen new medical device guidance documents in 2016 and 2017 alone. On May 25th, 2018, the General Data Protection Regulation went into effect and was designed to unify data privacy requirements across the European Union. And in March of next year, ISO 13485 will require the incorporation of risk management into every aspect of the quality management system in device and diagnostic companies. Small and medium-sized companies will especially feel the economic impact of meeting new regulations. More than ever, industry needs engaged teams to be able to respond and adhere to the changing landscape quickly, collaboratively, and with full transparency. A third challenge facing life science companies is the viability of their current technology system for managing their digital content. A recent survey of 250 global regulatory, marketing, and medical leaders in life science companies gives us a better understanding of how industry is currently using technology, or not in some cases, to manage their content. The survey results indicate that a wide range of systems are currently being used, from the most basic, paper and email, to the most robust and efficient industry-specific end-to-end solution. And if you look at the pie chart, over 50% of the respondents indicate that they use either paper or homegrown technology solution. What I found to be even more alarming were some of the additional statistics coming from the same survey. Over 80% of the respondents believe that their solutions did not provide the required reporting and insight into the management of the digital content. And that's whether through the review and approval process, or through the distribution through the various channels, or even the withdrawal of expired items. And almost 50% believe that they didn't have an adequate audit trail for the approval of the content. So what does this mean? If we take a look at those three challenges that we just talked about and distill it into one image, we have what commercial content management looks like today for many companies. We have the explosion of digital content, and it's coming from multiple sources, which often yields duplicate content. Some companies use multiple creative agencies or internal teams to create content. Brand or product managers, medical affairs teams, publication teams, legal teams all may create content that requires digital assets, such as photography, video, audio, logos, and all of that content requires some level of approval. Often global companies end up with regional silos operating with their own processes and disparate technology. And industry has historically had very manual methods of tracking distributed content and withdrawing it at expiration. If your organization resembles this at all, then you know that it's slow and risky and it's expensive to ensure compliance while moving content into channels quickly. There are three drivers that seem to be at the center of all digital transformation initiatives in this industry. The first is the need to create and disseminate content with speed. The faster marketing material is approved for distribution into the channels, the faster the customer journey begins. Do your brand teams and marketing team and creative agencies collaborate with complete transparency? Days can be lost waiting for emails to circulate or questions answered. And once material is created, there's nothing really more frustrating than to be ready to launch the new product, only to have that marketing material slowed down in the approval process. I shared on the previous slide that companies often have regional silos. And what that often means is that marketing teams in one region really don't have visibility into material created in another region that they might repurpose. Companies want to be able to quickly share approved content with all the source files across the organization and be able to quickly see any kind of data associated with that content. The second driver is the need to have compliant content that adheres to the regulatory requirements in the region where it's disseminated. This means that the people who are trained and knowledgeable must be part of the approval team, and that a full audit trail is available indicating who and how content was approved, and that control of those assets through the distribution channels is easily managed. And last, but certainly not least, is the desire to have insight into that content, whether the company uses data for KPIs or to find bottlenecks in the process, or to determine which assets are being reused. Analytics and metrics help organizations in the pursuit of continuous improvement. So let's take another quick poll. What would you consider to be the most significant driver for transforming the way your organization manages your content? Speed, compliance, insights? We know that speed is attractive from both a resource and a competitive perspective. Some organizations have excellent processes in place for compliance, but maybe the technology may not support the process well, or the lack of technology makes it unnecessarily burdensome. Or perhaps your organization has a strategic initiative to focus on metrics and analytics across all your business processes and solutions. Or maybe marketing teams really want to find out what the value is of that content that's being distributed either out by your field force or out on the web. So if you wouldn't mind making a selection, be sure to hit the submit button, and we're going to give it a quick moment for everyone to have an opportunity to respond. All right, so while we are waiting for everyone to respond, just a reminder that I have a guess of where we're going to land on these three, so I will let you know once the results come in. And just a couple of more seconds, and then we'll go ahead and look at the results. All right, wonderful. The results are in. And okay, so I would have thought we were a little bit more balanced between speed, compliance, insight. I did think compliance was the main driver, being that we're in a regulated space. So we're seeing 60% of you that have answered think that compliance is the primary driver for initiatives. and insight, those metrics and analytics, 40% of you said that that is the main driver. Great, thank you so much for participating in the poll. So we've examined some of the challenges companies are having with managing their digital content and the key pillars often cited as most important in the strategic initiatives. What is the solution? We know that digital assets are just that, they're assets and they have value. The marketing materials, web pages, sales presentations, videos, photographs, these all need to be connected in a seamless, efficient supply chain to get the most value out of those assets. The life cycle of material begins with creation collaboration, continues through the review and approval, and then it's distributed out to the channels and ends with expiration and withdrawal. A robust digital asset management system will track the source content with actionable data through the content lifecycle. And to provide further insight into the effectiveness and value of content, data from the field can be delivered back into the system to provide insights to show where developed content is performing well or underperforming, and where valuable content is being reused rather than being recreated, and how efficiently teams are working together. Before I turn the session over to Sean, I wanted to review one last slide to show some of the benefits of a connected digital supply chain. We know that speed to market is improved when marketing and creative teams and review teams have a transparent method of tracking and collaborating on content. With easy access to approved content, brand managers will find it easier to keep brand and messaging consistent. Insights based on data that accompanies content through the life cycle is available at every step of the content life cycle, including the value of the content during the customer journey. I'll end with this bit of data. Through the years of experience we have meeting with life science companies like yours, we found that only 0 to 2% of life science companies actually reuse developed content. At Veeva, we worked with a third party to build a return on investment modeling tool. What you're seeing on this slide is the potential savings that a company can achieve based on average numbers for a global enterprise pharma company. And the potential savings is a company's reused digital content from 1 to 2 campaigns and each of 80 countries where the product is marketed. While your organization's numbers may be very different, I just wanted you to know that 2 of our top 20 customers already have savings targets of $60 million and $100 million respectively. So we believe the savings truly are there. So with that, I'd like to turn the session over to Sean to take you through the story of Roche Diagnostics and how they're transforming their digital content management. Sean?
Thank you, Terry, and hello, everyone. In case you're not familiar with who Roche is, we are a Swiss-based company located in over 100 countries across the globe, and we are a global pioneer in pharmaceuticals and diagnostics. So that's just a little bit about Roche. And as I get into telling you about our journey, it's really important for you to understand that Roche, like many companies, and many companies who have this challenge, we are a decentralized organization. So we're made up of global business areas, regions, sub-regions, affiliate countries, local business areas, and even functional areas within Roche as well. And the challenge and barrier that we have as I tell this story, one is that we're a decentralized organization, all with a decentralized decision-making type of process, or each of these entities that I'm showing you on the screen all have their own decision-making, which makes it quite difficult to get alignment across the globe. So as we move into this as well, I want to point out that we started this journey several years ago, and it came with a landscape audit where we took a hard look at content, the digital channels that we have, our websites, and really all of our systems also that related to content management. And what we found through this audit is a vast array of disparate or non-existent systems and processes. And the interesting thing about that is, before we found the results or received the results, when you go out and talk to the different affiliates and business areas, they're really confident in their processes. They were confident in their systems. And as we dug into the audits and the findings, when some of the areas talked about their systems, they were, in some instances, talking about a spreadsheet where 12 people were managing the audit information and the traceability of that content that's being used on the different channels. And what we found there was a really big problem just in terms of knowledge transfer. Quite often, and especially in a marketing organization, there's a lot of turnover, there's a lot of movement across the organization, and this information was not being passed on to the next group of individuals that were responsible for maintaining the audit trail and the traceability. Not only that, but complex or even non-existent review and approval processes. The content was being stored in silos in different areas across the globe, which made it very difficult for the reuse of content. And then I mentioned the traceability already, but what we found was content living on different channels that really should have been removed from those channels a while back. So all of this led, in addition to inconsistent processes or inefficient processes, led to a high compliance risk and a lot of wasted resources. So after the audit, we brought forth a business case. And the three pillars that really supported our case, number one was the compliance story. We really were at what we felt significant risk from a global legal regulatory perspective. We were inefficient. There was no content reuse. Less than 1% of content globally was being reused. And also, our marketing teams, our regulatory teams, they really had no insight in terms of how long does it take for content to be reviewed, to be approved. So we were just inefficient in managing our work because of the lack of insight. And all of these pillars really come to form what we needed to instill or implement it within the organization was a single source of truth. So aligned systems and aligned processes as well. So we had our vision, and this was our vision. We wanted a single system to manage our end-to-end content review, approval, and distribution. So really with that content review, big part of this was actually being able to link the claims that we were making in our promotional pieces directly to the substantiation, the reference documents, and to really be able to back that up. With non-existent systems, and disconnected systems and processes, that type of information was really difficult to produce on demand and often took a lot of work in tracking that down. But then also just from a collaboration perspective, being able to bring all of our global groups together and even our local groups, medical, legal, regulatory, those types of bodies into the system and be able to have one place to have that conversation and be able to track the review and approval processes. But even beyond that, we had a vision where we could automate the distribution and creation of content, of approved content on different digital channels, but also, and probably even more importantly, was be able to automate the withdrawal of that content, either when there was a manual withdrawal or expiration. So expiration of the content and enforcing that expiration date was a very big part of this for us as well. So automating the withdrawal or creation and the withdrawal was also key for us. And then I mentioned it already, understanding the data. What is our average review and approval time from the time we upload it to the time it gets approved. How many cycles is it going through in a review process? Are we staffed appropriately? Do we have enough resources to manage the content? As marketers, being able to actually see how long it takes for our content to go through the process enables us to more efficiently and effectively plan our time and how we're going to manage this entire process. But then finally, having one place where we can go to get on-demand audit information, so the full audit trail and history of that piece of content. So that was our vision. But with visions come challenges, and there were a lot of questions that we had to answer. There were internal barriers to get us to the point where we were achieving that vision. And one of the first questions that we had is, we have a disconnected and a decentralized decision-making organization. How do we get everyone to align organizationally on a global system and then also on a global process? How do we structure a project team in a decentralized organization? With a presence in over 100 countries, it's really difficult for us to include representatives from every affiliate or from every business area and functional team. So how do we structure the project team effectively to achieve our goals? How do we take all the content that is produced in all the affiliates and our global BAs, and how do we bring it into a place where anybody that needs that content at Roche can go and have quick and easy access to approved content, understand where it can be used, when it can be used, how it can be used, and then also get access to the source files, really enable the reuse of the content. And if we're going to automate the content, the creation of the content on different digital channels, how do we replace the version content? So these were all things that as we went into, we really didn't know that how we were going to face that. But then also, if the content needs to be manually withdrawn or it's expired, how do we get it off those channels in a timely manner? So we know we're going to be improving the traceability, but how do we enforce that withdrawal? And then finally, again, how do we enable that content reuse? So let's take a look at how we answered the first question. How do we align organizationally on global system and process? And I cannot understate the importance of having strong executive sponsorship. That was, having a strong sponsor, executive sponsor, was probably one of the number one most important success factors that we had in the project. Because without that, getting the organization to align globally, I honestly don't believe it would have happened. But we had an engaged and executive sponsor. But also, we used a lot of change management process to ensure that our executive sponsor was engaged and also was equipped to have the right kind of conversations and alignment meetings that he needed to have at that executive level. So one of the first things he did was made sure that he aligned with our executive leadership team. The entire leadership team, LT, was aligned and endorsing and supporting this project. And it took us a while to get there, but once we had that, then we really started to see more success and gain more ground and just getting this project to the approval part. Because with that aligned leadership team, they then are able to influence and cascade down to the regions, to the business areas, and also directly into the affiliate countries. Secondly, the project team. Having the project team and structuring that in a decentralized organization to be representative globally was important. And from here, we took the key stakeholders in this, business representatives, regional representatives. We involved the larger affiliates within our organization, and even some affiliates that we knew historically had reputations for being just a little difficult. Making sure that we had our business process team involved, regulatory, they're a part of our core team that made up this project, all the way through to communications training and having that very strong organizational change management approach. So the next question that we had to answer was, how do we best manage approved content that is available in multiple systems? So I mentioned it before, one of the goals of the project was to align everyone on a common platform with common processes. And that's where we also built this single source of truth for all promotional content. So part of that came with the alignment is that we implemented a global standard operating procedure that governed the global promotional, or I say global promotional, but the promotional content approval processes. We did have a level of global content that was being produced, but also local affiliate content that's being produced as well. But while we implemented global standards and global processes, we really also had to be careful and appreciate and include the local affiliate country regulations as well. Now, there was a line that had to be towed, and we did enforce this. There's, on one hand, allowing everybody to just take this as a free-for-all and everybody throws in and has their preferences on how we configure and align this system. And we took a very hard stance that we were implementing the global standard. But where we did have flexibility is when it came to in-country laws and regulations. Those were, for us, non-negotiable. We did and put those in. Now, thankfully, with the system that we have, had the flexibility that allowed us to enforce global standards, but also have the flexibility to build in some variations for certain affiliates because of their laws and their regulations demanded it. Overall, what we found is that globally, most of the process is fairly aligned, and that was a relief. And then also, well, that's okay, we can move on. So from a version content, so one of the barriers that we identified earlier on, or challenges, was how do we efficiently replace version content? Well, part of this, we implemented a middleware technology that it connected the APIs from our content approval system to all the integrated digital channels. And that's what this is showing, the connection to websites. That was a major integration that we have, e-detailing platforms, and also marketing automation platforms. So we built that middle layer, and where we're able to use the content approval system to build in business rules and logic, as well as within that middle layer. Now, when we get an approved piece of content within the content approval system, we'll say that it's at a version 1.0. So as we designed this, so as it was the right digital channels were selected, the content would be approved and automatically created on these channels. Now, if a piece of content was then to be updated, so we would have to take that through a reapproval process within the system. And so what we would do is we would return that to draft, and it would go up to a minor version. And from there, once that was approved and it became a 2.0, a major version, then we would automate the replacement and updating of those files on those different connected systems. All right. Now, one thing I didn't mention, and I should have, is while we were in a draft state, our first version was still approved and still continued to live on those channels. So we did not withdraw it immediately. Now this was the outcome of where we ended up, but to get here, it did take a lot of planning, a lot of discussion, a lot of learning, discovery, and even some trial and error to get us to where we needed to be. So it was a significant journey that we took, one that we didn't underestimate the complexity that could be incurred. But at the end of the day, the automation that we get out of it, the efficiencies that we've gained, the traceability that we have to the content is very worth it, right? All right, so that's how we overcame the version content. We relied on the business rules in our content approval system, mixed with a very solid middle layer technology that allowed us to make those connections to those channels. And the same with the expired content. So if you remember, the question was, how do we retract expired content in a timely manner? And again, we went to the business rules that we were able to build into the approval system with our middle layer as well. And so if we have that approved content, version 2.0 from the last example, and that piece of content is set to expire tomorrow, so what would happen is, of course, our process managers within the system would have the ability to streamline a reapproval process. But if they chose to let the content expire, or even if they manually withdrew it, we would expire that content on demand if they manually withdrew it, or in this case, again, we would let it expire. So what would happen is on the date of the expiration, so if this was tomorrow, then we would have an expired version 2.0. And the business rules and logic that we built in would then, missing a animation. So the business rules and logic that we built in would then ensure that the content was expired on those connected systems, and then ensure that it was successful and that content was no longer available. So really what we did was we used a great set of process and technologies and capitalized on the functionality that our content approval system had as well. And then finally, enabling content reuse. Content reuse was a big challenge in our previous state, and it was one of the #1 things that affiliates would ask for, because we have these global business areas producing really great content. But that content was only getting to a fraction of the company, because if you remember, again, very decentralized, approved content was stored all over the place in these quote-unquote regional silos, and there was no clear direction for anyone in the content in the company to find the content that they were looking for. So what we did was we stood up a brand portal that is connected and integrated into the content approval system. And with this brand portal, we're able to have one single source or point of access for anyone within the organization. Now, the only variation to that is our sales team. And we configured this to allow our sales team access to the brand portal, but only to content that is approved for use in their country, because they're client-facing, and if this content was not approved for use in their country, we did not want them to have access, because that could be a compliance violation. So we stood up the brand portal, and not only did we make the approved content available through that brand portal, but also in our process, we built in the storing of the source files. So whether it's an InDesign file, a Photoshop, PowerPoint presentations, or like a PPT or PPTX, the marketers or anyone else needing to create promotional content was able to get to that directly. But also an important piece of that brand portal was the search function. Search function was incredibly huge because we could put a portal in place, and if it doesn't have great search, then nobody's going to find the content, and we might as well not even have the portal. So search was a very important piece of that as well. So once they found the content that they were looking for, they could easily pull the source files. They could localize the content for their country, and then they would put it back through the content approval system for in-country review and approval of that piece of content. And when we talk about reuse, so I mentioned the use case where affiliates were getting access to global content, but what we've seen is not only that, but there's local to local reuse as well. So when pieces of content are translated into a common language that other countries can use, then we see an uptick and increase of reuse there as well. So we're talking global to local, local to local, and even business area to business area. And as a result, you start to see and realize the savings that you have when content is reused. We estimate that it's around 40% savings, depending on the piece, but around 40% savings to reuse a piece of content versus create a piece from new. So just to recap, again, keys to success for us, once we understood what the problem was, or set of problems and challenges, once we established our vision, then really bringing in and building that strong relationship with your executive sponsor, and then the active engagement that was cultivated and fostered with that individual was vital to us to get the project approved. And then later on, what I didn't mention was when we would come up against certain barriers that we would try to address, but if there's a point where we have to escalate, then our executive sponsorship was that key point of escalation, and they were able to really mitigate the issue or questions, or really nullify that barrier that arose as we went through this journey. And to be very transparent, at some points there were barriers every day. Sometimes selling this to the global organization is very challenging, because some people, they don't want to admit that they have gaps in their process or the systems. People like to think like, hey, I've never had an audit finding. Why do I need to adopt this? We're just fine as we are. But when we are able to finally get them to think about it and get them to see the system and experience what that system can mean for them, we really start to see them come around and be very accepting. One of our strongest barriers, our largest barriers from an affiliate perspective, we could barely get a meeting and an audience with them. Once we were able to really show them the system, get them to understand what it is that we're trying to do, they became champions of the project, and in fact then we're one of the very first countries that we were able to roll this out to. And they were a big influencer. And that, again, a lot of that started with that executive sponsor. So having a core project team that had the global representation, part of that too was we had a policy of just openness and transparency. And I would lay out very clearly, to the different stakeholders, these are our challenges. This is the issue. This is where we may have went wrong. And and didn't make the right decision. But having that core project team that builds the trust in the organization, and people can see that, oh, this wasn't a project that was being ran and managed by the U.S. or by other groups within the organization, that this was truly a global collaborative team with very strong players, and that was a factor in building our core project team. I mentioned several times the organizational change management. A project of this size, you have to have solid change management in place, because if you don't, then you will not have the tools or be equipped with the tools that you'll need to address different barriers that come through a project like this. And having organizational change management in place really builds a framework for you to resolve those barriers. Building the standard processes across the system, but still celebrating, or not celebrating, but appreciating local process and building that flexibility into the system is key as well. And then finally, for ongoing success, really you need to have a team in place that is responsible for that. So they can be escalation paths, they can do knowledge transfer and knowledge sharing, but also be proactive when they start to see that there's bottlenecks in a certain country, or a certain country does not have the average upload to approved content time versus the average. And so they were able to reach out and again, be proactive and help address issues within the organization. So those were really, at the end of the day, our keys to success, and each one of those was very important. So that is our journey, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn this back over to Tarek for questions and answers. Tarek?
Thank you very much, Sean. Yes, that's right. So now we're going to start our Q&A session today. So audience members, just a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, you can send it in via the questions widget. It's that box at the top left-hand corner of your screen. Once you've typed your question in, hit submit, and that sends it through to us. I'm going to try to get to as many as we have time for here. So let's start with this one. Somebody today has sent in this question. Thank you to that person. And they have said, can you tell us more about the middleware technology that you implemented? Was it a commercially available solution?
Yes, it was a commercially available solution. I won't say the name of it, but what I can tell you that it was a global standard that was built within our IT organization. Very flexible piece of middle or technology there, and very strong. But also just the key thing to be aware of when we were talking about middleware and those processes is do not underestimate the complexity of the design, the business rules that you build in, and the implementation of that. It can be its own project of substantial size just on its own, but at the end of the day, really was key in enabling us to achieve that vision of automation. And once we had that in place too, everybody was very happy. It was well worth the investment, the time and energy that we put into it.
Thank you very much for that answer. I'm going to move on to another question here. So this one says, was there any modularization of content required for the reuse? How did the content reuse impact the way your content was created? So
we did not do really any modularization of the content. What we did is that we gave all of our marketers and other content creators access to content all content that was approved, whether it was in other affiliate countries or whether it was global content. And in doing so, for the first time, they had access to it, and we had to ensure, though, that they were well trained and they knew that you just can't find a piece of content and then start to use it anywhere you want. You really do need to go through the localization of that content for in-country review and approval and put it through that process. Now, in terms of the impact, really what we've seen is that smaller countries that have fewer resources, where you have 1 or 2 people in marketing that are doing everything, whereas a larger affiliate has 20 people that can manage, all of the marketing activities. So this reuse and making this available to them really helped them be more efficient and effective in streamlining their process. So that was a big impact that we've seen, along with just some of the savings that I mentioned earlier.
Thank you very much for the answer there. Audience members, please do keep these great questions coming in. You can do that by using the box. That's the one at the top left-hand corner of your screen. So type your question in and hit submit. The next question we have here, someone said, how did you manage to sell the business case within the organization? What was the biggest convincer?
So that's a great question, and the real answer, the big answer could be, this could be its own webinar just on how do you sell this to the business, because Roche is just like any other company where year to year, we're trying very hard to keep our budgets flat. So when you bring a project like this to the table that does have a fair amount of cost and does add to regional, global, or affiliate budgets without them reducing any resource or existing budget that they have, it can be a tough sell. So again, that's where our executive sponsorship came into play. There was a recognized compliance risk. So at the end of the day, one of our major pillars was that compliance story. And even within our approval governing body on projects, not everybody was buying that. So making sure that we did have the transparency, but also going in and making sure that we spent the time connecting with the individuals that were making the decisions to really understand what were their barriers, why are they not willing to approve this project, and sometimes have some very tough conversations, sometimes escalate to the executive sponsor. But at the end of the day, what we found, sometimes they just didn't understand what it was. So maybe we didn't clearly state our case and what we're trying to do, and really understanding what their barrier is, and then strategizing and building a plan to address their barrier. It did take us 3 cycles to get approval, and finally we were able to. And once we got the approval, then really it's been, everybody's been fully on board.
Thank you very much for the answer there. I'm going to move on to our next question here. So this person says, how do you work with external partners on your new system? Is there a way to control what they see?
Yeah, and it really goes to being able to really manage that with the roles and the permissions and security that you can put in place within the system. So a lot of our different, really, you go to any affiliate, any global business area, and their process is slightly different. So in some affiliates or global BAs, you have the lifecycle team members, marketers, uploading the content, but they're passing the process on to another person to manage the review and approval workflow processes, where another affiliate might have all of their marketers uploading the content and managing the process, while others still would have their creative agencies, their external vendors, upload the content and then run this through a workflow process to assign an internal Roche process manager that would then manage the review and approval workflows within the system. So we were very flexible, and the system has the flexibility that allows us to accommodate the different ways that our people across Roche work. Now, with the security in play, all the external vendor can do is upload the content, set the metadata that needs to be applied to the piece of content, and then invoke a workflow process to assign it to an internal Roche employee. So that's how we control that. So they absolutely have no ability to see any other content that's in the system.
Thank you very much for the answer there. I'm going to move on to another question. Audience members, if you do have any last questions, you can submit those by the box at the top left-hand corner of the screen. We're going to try to get to a couple more here before we wrap things up today. So if you do have any last-minute questions, get them in now. The next question is it possible to see retired content on the system?
The answer is yes, once it goes into an expired or withdrawn state. Now, when it's in that state, we cannot reactivate it as an approved piece of content. It will persist in that expired state indefinitely, and then also it's in line with our retention policies. So there does reach a certain retention period where we will then, the process would be that it gets wiped from the system. But that's actually several years. Now, what is possible is that if it's in an expired or withdrawn state, typically if it's withdrawn, there's reasons behind it, but the users can make copies of it and then put that copy back through the medical, legal, regulatory review and approval process within their affiliate country.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to another question now. This one says, what's your approach on getting the global alignment?
Yeah, so that was a big part, I think, of what the presentation covered. But, you know, again, it was that global or that executive sponsorship aligning with the global leadership, and then and then that leadership team being able to cascade down and champion and support the project through the affiliates, or the regions, subregions, the affiliates, and the global BAs. But we just didn't let that happen organically. We did equip them with change management. We used the strategies and put those in place, but gave them the tools that they needed to have in order to be active. We actually laid ground rules for them, for executive sponsor as well. And this is what we expected of that person as the executive sponsor. Now, a fair bit of luck also played into it. This person was phenomenal. And in all the projects I've ever been on, I've never experienced the level of engagement and involvement, and just the level that this person went to be our champion. So that was really the biggest factors in getting global alignment.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Sean, for the answers there. I'm afraid we are all out of time here today. I'm sorry if we didn't get to your question, but yeah, we have to wrap things up now. So really that just leaves me to thank our speakers. So Sean, Terry, thank you very much for that presentation. Thank you as well to Veeva Systems for the sponsor today. And to all attendees, you will receive an email shortly telling you how you can access the on-demand version of this webinar if you'd like to rewatch it or take notes. So that will be available to you.